how much would you spend on a bottle of wine? $10? $100? How about 1,000? 10,000? Yeah, me neither. But believe it or not, some people have spent way more than that on a single bottle. In this video, we're going over the top 10 most expensive wines ever sold. Don't get me wrong, I'll splurge on a nice bottle now and again, but some are just a little bit out of my price range. The wines we're gonna go over on this list all have a reason out of the ordinary that put them here, and were mostly sold at auction. And they do have a few things in common, which I'll go over at the end of the video. If you want to know more about wine pricing and how wine bottles are priced, be sure to check out my cheap versus expensive blind tasting video, where I talk all about the factors that go into wine pricing. All right, without any further ado, here are the top 10 most expensive wines ever sold. First up is a wine that was owned by Thomas Jefferson himself. 1787 Chateau LAFITE, sold for $156,000. It's a famous winery from Bordeaux in France. Jefferson was a known enophile, and this Cabernet Sauvignon blend was from his private cellar. He even carved his initials into the bottle. Unfortunately, the bottle wasn't stored properly, the cork was dried out, and the wine was unable to be drunk. But still kind of cool to own a piece of history, right? PENFOLDS 2004 Block 42 Cabernet Sauvignon went for $168,000. This is from South Australia's Barossa Valley, and PENFOLDS is a very famous producer. But what sets this wine apart is the bottle. They call it AMPOULE from PENFOLDS, and the bottle, there are only 12 made on the entire planet, from master glass blowers and sculptors. This wine bottle is a bit of a work of art. When the owner finally decides to open it, the only way to do so is to break the glass off the end, so a member of the PENFOLDS team comes to the owner and provides this service personally, along with a masterclass on the wine. So I'm gonna chalk this price down to really good marketing. I actually had some trouble confirming which wine was number 8 on this list, but I'm fairly certain it's a 1990 Domaine Musigny Grand Cru at $224,000. This Pinot Noir is actually fairly easy to explain. One of the best producers and one of the most famous places, Burgundy, France, in a great year. Another wine from Thomas Jefferson's cellar. Number 7 is a 1787 Chateau Margaux, a first growth wine from Bordeaux, France. And this one has a bit of an unfortunate ending. The buyer brought it to a dinner, a waiter bumped the table, and the wine shattered into pieces. The insurance ended up paying out the buyer, but the wine was never tasted. And the poor waiter. A second Chateau LAFITE from Bordeaux makes the list, this time from 1869. This Cabernet blend was bought by an anonymous buyer from Asia, where this producer is extremely rare to find. This one's pretty cool. Number 5 is a Champagne, the only non-red wine on the list. HEIDSIECK 1907 for $275,000. What makes it special though is that it was perfectly preserved in a shipwreck, no light and cold temperatures. In 1916, the first ship was torpedoed in World War I and held 2,000 bottles of wine. The shipwreck was then discovered in 1997 and the wines recovered. Tasting notes included gunflint, graham cracker, and flamed oranges. Sounds pretty good. Number 4 is the 1947 Cheval Blanc from Bordeaux, France, a Merlot-based blend. This wine's simply known as the greatest Bordeaux wine ever made. Chateau Cheval Blanc is a Premier Grand Cru Classé rank from Saint-Emilion, Bordeaux. Funny enough, this vintage was known as relatively poor, but Cheval Blanc still ended up producing an incredible wine. Fun fact, this is the wine the food critic orders in Ratatouille.
You provide the food, I'll provide the perspective, which would go nicely with a bottle of Cheval Blanc 1947.
Man, Anton Ego was really raking it in as a food reviewer to afford that wine. And we're into the top 3. This wine kind of cheats a little bit. It's not just one bottle, but 4. It's a JEROBOAM of Chateau MOUTON-ROTHSCHILD 1945 for $310,700. A JEROBOAM is a 3-liter bottle, the equivalent of 4 standard bottles. Besides being from the famous Bordeaux, France, and from one of the most famous families, this Cabernet blend marks the Allied victory of World War II and was also considered an outstanding vintage. Up until a few years ago, this $500,000 bottle was number 1 on the list, but now it's number 2. It's 1992 Screaming Eagle from Napa Valley, California. This is a cult Napa Valley Cabernet and is very, very rare. This is the first vintage the winery released. Robert Parker gave it 99 out of 100 points, and it was sold at a charity auction in 2000. And drum roll, we've arrived to the #1 most expensive wine ever sold. And it's not much of a surprise, as every year this wine is generally known as one of the best wines in the world. It's Domaine ROMANÉE-CONTI, or DRC as it's known in wine circles. This is arguably the greatest wine producer, Domaine ROMANÉE-CONTI, in the greatest wine region in the world, Burgundy, the most famed vineyard in the world, Romanée-Conti, with the greatest grape in the world, Pinot Noir. And the 1945 vintage sold for $558,000 in 2018. This vintage was special for a few reasons. It was one of the first wines made in a war-torn France after World War II. It was a tremendous year from a wine growing standpoint. And it was the last year this world-famous vineyard produced vines from its original rootstock before replanting. And this wine may still increase in value if the owners haven't opened it yet. The vintage was good enough that experts say it still has aging potential. And there you have it, the top 10 most expensive wines ever sold. So what do they all have in common? Are they made from super rare grapes? Nope. Most of them are Cabernet, Merlot, or Pinot Noir. Are the bottles plated in gold, encrusted in diamonds? No again. With the exception of the Penfolds, they all come in plain old bottles. And with the exception of the Thomas Jefferson wines, none are signed by a rock star or anything like that. So what do they have in common? Well, besides all of them having factors that make them very unique, such as a famous producer or history, the #1 reason they're so special is because of the place that they come from. 8 from historic wine regions in France, 1 from the iconic Napa Valley, and 1 from the famous Barossa Valley in Australia. And this isn't a coincidence. It's what we call terroir in wine. It's the sum of an environment a wine is produced in. Climate, soil, topography, weather, etc. The wines on this list were never going to be from Iowa. They're from places that have long proven historic track records of producing fine wine. It's why in our show, Vias for Vino, we focus on a new wine region each episode to find out what makes wine from a particular place special and unique, instead of just comparing different grapes or producers, for instance. And the good news is that unlike this list, there's plenty of affordable wines from both these famous wine regions and others all across the world. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. I hope you learned a bit more about the most expensive wines in the world and why they are that way. I mentioned at the top, if you want to know more about wine pricing, check out our blind tasting where I do cheap versus expensive wines and explain wine pricing. And if you want more content, I'd encourage you to check out Vino VIP. It's our members only club. It's only $5 a month and you get access to stuff we don't post on YouTube. You'll get early access to the YouTube videos. We have raffles and giveaways, and you'll get early access to season 4 of Vias for Vino. It's gonna be really fun. We're going to Europe, we're going to Spain, Portugal, Italy, France, so you're not gonna wanna miss it. Thanks for watching. Till next wine.